June 1942, south of Tobruk. The desert is not silent, it hums. A column of German trucks pushes east under a fading copper sky. Engines grind in low rhythm. Radiators tick. The drivers keep their spacing tight. Fuel is precious, dust concealment necessary. In the beds of the vehicles, jerrycans of petrol, ammunition crates, spare parts, the bloodstream of an army that cannot survive without movement. Then the third truck in mine erupts. Not from beneath. Not from above. It simply bursts apart. A flash inside the chassis, followed by a concussion that flips the vehicle sideways. Fuel ignites midair. Men scatter into the sand, stunned, their ears ringing. No artillery, no aircraft, no mine crater in the road. 30 seconds later, another detonation further back in the column. The blast feels internal, as if the machine has turned on itself. When the smoke clears, there is no obvious explanation. Only twisted axles and a question that will follow the Africa corpse for months. How can a convoy detonate from within? The German officer in charge kneels beside the wreckage. He expects to find a mine signature, a gouge in the earth, shrapnel embedded upward through the undercarriage. Instead, the sand beneath the truck is undisturbed. The blast originated inside the vehicle. Fuel cans ruptured outward. The engine block is split, not pierced. It looks less like an ambush and more like spontaneous combustion, a mechanical betrayal. Accusations begin immediately. Poor maintenance, faulty carburetors, careless fuel handling, Italian suppliers, local dock workers at Benghazi, saboteurs at Tripoli, perhaps British agents in Arab dress. But no one can point to a single cause, and that uncertainty is more dangerous than any confirmed enemy, because this is not just a destroyed truck. It is doubt, injected directly into the German supply chain. To understand the damage, you have to understand the fragility. The German war machine in North Africa was not defeated by tanks alone. It was throttled by distance. Every advance eastward lengthened supply lines stretching back across the Mediterranean. Ships crossed contested waters from Italy. Cargo was unloaded at vulnerable ports. Fuel was trucked hundreds of miles across exposed desert corridors. The Africa Corps did not simply fight the British. It fought mathematics. A single panzer division consumed staggering quantities of fuel. A stalled convoy could immobilize an entire offensive. Speed was Rommel's advantage. Tempo, surprise, relentless movement. Without fuel, maneuver warfare collapses into static defense. The British understood this. They could not always match German operational agility in 1941 and 1942, but they could study its arteries. And arteries, once contaminated, fail quietly. The British solution was not dramatic. It was not large. It did not require air superiority or artillery barrages. It required coal. Specifically, a piece of coal that was not coal. The device had existed in various forms since the First World War, a molded explosive disguised as fuel. In the Second World War, it was refined and distributed by British sabotage units, including elements linked to the Special Operations Executive. It looked ordinary. Rough edges. Blackened surface. The weight was convincing. From a shovel's distance, indistinguishable from genuine coal. But inside the brittle shell concealed a high explosive core. The concept was brutally simple. Slip the false lump into a fuel supply, a depot, a stockpile, a cargo shipment. Wait. When the disguised charge is shoveled into a furnace, boiler, or engine combustion system, heat does the rest. The casing cracks. The explosive detonates. In confined machinery, the result is catastrophic. It is not designed to crater roads, it is designed to destroy systems. And in North Africa, German transport depended heavily on fuel depots and engine-fed vehicles operating under extreme heat stress. Even a small internal blast could rupture fuel lines, ignite petrol vapors, and transform a truck into an expanding fireball. The beauty of the device was not its power, it was its invisibility. There is no dramatic commando raid attached to most of these devices. No cinematic parachute drops. Often infiltration happened far from the desert front, at ports, in warehouses, during loading operations, through local labor networks, through agents who required only seconds of access to a coal pile or fuel staging area. From there, the sabotage weapon traveled obediently within the German logistical system, handled by German workers, loaded by German drivers, delivered to German convoys. The British did not need to chase trucks across sand dunes. They needed the trucks to carry their trap willingly. And once embedded in the supply chain, the device required no further intervention. War reduced to patience. When the explosion occurs inside an engine block or near stored petrol, it behaves differently from an external strike. A landmine drives force upward. An artillery shell fragments inward. But an internal detonation multiplies through secondary effects. Fuel atomizes. Metal fragments ricochet within confined compartments. Pressure waves rupture tanks, ignite vapors, and amplify the blast far beyond the original charge size. To a witness, it appears as though the vehicle combusted spontaneously, and that illusion is devastating, because a visible enemy can be fought, an invisible flaw cannot. Within weeks, German convoy procedures begin to change. Inspections increase. Fuel is checked and rechecked. Coal shipments are examined piece by piece. But how do you inspect coal? Break every lump open? Test burn each shovel load? The manpower required becomes absurd. Mechanics grow defensive. Drivers grow hesitant. Every engine backfire sounds like a prelude to annihilation. The British have not destroyed hundreds of trucks. They have slowed them. And in desert warfare, delay is death. A stalled convoy means armored units waiting for petrol. Waiting tanks are vulnerable tanks. Offensive momentum dissolves into defensive posture. Rommel's operational style depended on bold thrusts, rapid envelopments before the enemy could consolidate. But each unexplained explosion forces caution, and caution erodes tempo. There is a psychological layer that rarely appears in after-action reports. Machines are extensions of trust. A driver climbs into his cab believing that his vehicle will respond predictably, that the threat comes from outside, from enemy guns, from mines, from aircraft. But when a truck detonates from within, that certainty fractures. Now the threat might be in the cargo bed, in the fuel tank, in the engine itself. It is one thing to drive toward artillery fire. It is another to wonder whether your own ignition will kill you. That distinction matters. Morale is not only about courage under fire, it is about confidence in systems. The British trap targeted that confidence directly. German countermeasures never fully solved the problem. Fuel screening intensified, supply chains were tightened. Suspected sabotage networks were hunted aggressively. Punishments were severe, but suspicion is corrosive. Local workers were interrogated, Allied prisoners were blamed, internal security services became involved. Each explosion expanded the circle of distrust. And distrust consumes time, investigations, paperwork, procedural revisions, all while the desert sun continues to burn fuel at unforgiving rates. The device itself cost little. The consequences multiplied geometrically. It is tempting to measure weapons by explosive yield, tonnage dropped, caliber size, armor penetration. But the coal bomb, the disguised charge, belongs to a different category of warfare. It weaponized logistics. It turned supply chains into potential detonators. It forced an industrial army to question the integrity of its own materials. In modern terms, it was a supply chain attack, physical, not digital, but conceptually similar. Trust was the true target, and once damaged, trust does not repair quickly. By late 1942, the tide in North Africa began shifting decisively. Allied material superiority increased. Axis shipping losses mounted. Fuel shortages became chronic. No single device caused that outcome. But cumulative disruptions matter. An army at the end of a tenuous supply line cannot afford mystery explosions. It cannot afford delay. It cannot afford internal doubt. The cheap British trap did not win the Desert War. It helped stretch German logistics past their breaking point. It accelerated friction in an already strained system, and friction, applied consistently, defeats speed. Return to that evening south of Tobruk. The officer stands over the wreckage. Smoke drifts low across cooling metal. The desert is quiet again, almost indifferent. He cannot report enemy artillery. He cannot mark minefield encountered. He writes something vaguer, mechanical failure, possible sabotage. But he does not know where to look. The remaining trucks idle nervously, drivers glancing at their dashboards as though expecting betrayal. Orders are given to resume movement. They drive on. Yet something invisible rides with them now, not another explosive. Something subtler. The awareness that the next detonation might come without warning. Not from the horizon, but from the engine block beneath their hands. War is often imagined as clash and thunder. But sometimes it is a single counterfeit lump of coal, indistinguishable from the real thing, waiting patiently inside a fuel pile. A small deception, a contained spark, and an empire's momentum, undone not by a grand explosion, but by the quiet suspicion that any machine might already be carrying its own destruction.